So again, my name is Stanley Berry. I'm going to be one of the co-hosts for this evening. If you still haven't introduced yourself in the chat, feel free to use the chat. And we're going to be using that to talk as well all night. So feel free to use it. I'm an educator engagement associate from Digital Promise, and I'm looking forward into diving into computational thinking this evening with you all and my co-host, Dr. Mareka Conrad. Mareka, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday night with us. My name is Mareka Conrad. I am a learning experience designer at Digital Promise and have the pleasure of working on our computational thinking projects and with the lovely panelists that we're going to have today. So I'm excited to be in conversation with all of you and share some knowledge between all of us.
For sure. Thank you, Mareka. So each workshop, we like to start by stating our purpose, just as a reminder of the work that we do and why we do the work that we do and what we look to accomplish for the session. So our purpose, the powerful learning community for coaches, brings together optimistic educators who are passionate about driving change for and from their schools. As we talk throughout the evening, we just want to give you some stuff to keep in mind so that we can all collaborate in this virtual environment. So we're going to agree to speak our truths responsibly. We're going to be mindful to remain muted if someone is speaking, just so we can have, less background noise, and listen to understand. We're going to have a lot of passionate conversations, and just know that everybody's coming from a place of goodness and they mean well when they say the things that they say. So what is computational thinking? Computational thinking is an interrelated set of skills and practices for solving complex problems, a way to learn topics in many disciplines, and a necessity for fully participating in a computational world. Many different terms are used when talking about computing, computer science, computational thinking, and programming. So computing encompasses the skills and practices in both computer science and computational thinking. While computer science is an individual academic discipline, computational thinking is a problem-solving approach that integrates across activities and programming. Activities and programming is the practice of developing a set of instructions that a computer can understand and execute, as well as debugging, organizing, and applying that code to appropriate problem-solving contexts. The skills and practices requiring computational thinking are broader, leveraging concepts and skills from computer science and applying them to other contexts such as core academic disciplines like art, English, language arts, math, science, social studies, and everyday problem solving. So to kick off our discussion on computational thinking, since we are discussing CT, we'd like to know, what is your first experience like with a computer? Was it fun? What happened? Was it an enjoyable experience? I think for me, my first experience was maybe around fourth grade. We had some pretty chunky computers, a lot of big parts. Computers have gone down in size a lot since then. But I remember it being pretty fun, pretty engaging. We had different learning modules where we would learn stuff in a fun way. So feel free to share in the chat or just unmute and let us know, what was your first experience like?
Hello. I just like to share that my first experience was when we used to have computer day in elementary school. And we used to be so excited to play the Oregon Trail computer game. So I still remember that to this day because we love that game. It was on floppy disk.
Floppy disk, that's a throwback. And I remember computer days too. Thank you for sharing that. Feel free to jump in anytime.
I worked on a mainframe in high school coded Fortran. And then in the business department, they had better computers. They had the TRS-80s, which were standalone models. We commonly call them trash 80s these days, but they were my first exposure.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember those too. That's a nice memory. Thank you for sharing.
Uh, add similarly, Oregon Trail and our computer room in my elementary school didn't have enough copies for everyone to have a floppy disk for their computer. So it was like a mad rush to get the Oregon Trail. And if not, then you had to do Reader Rabbit, which wasn't that bad, but no one wanted to do Reader Rabbit when Oregon Trail was an option. So yeah. So part of my first experience was like everyone running to the back of the room trying to get that.
I remember those days trying to get the good computer.
When I met my husband and he said he was into computer programming, and I said to him on our first date, "What's that?" And he took me into his office, which had these huge, big frame computer machines that took up the entire room. And the idea that we now can hold a computer in our hand and a phone is just remarkable. And when I finally got my own Apple computer, I remember the gentleman from whom I bought it said, "Make sure you save your work periodically." And I remember calling him up in a panic that the screen had gone black. I must have pressed the wrong button. And the first thing he said to me was, "Did you save?" So now I save everything on flash drives, on backups, on hard drives.
That's a golden rule, save as you go. Thank you everyone for sharing. We have a great panel coming up, so I don't want to keep you all waiting any longer. We're going to jump right into our panelists. So we're joined by Tim Dixon. He's a teacher and elementary coach in Prince George's County Schools, right up the street from me in Maryland. He's sure to have some great stuff to say, so please stand by. We have David Gomez, a computational thinking instructional coach for Project Tomorrow in New York City, also a great panelist. And then save the best for last, which is Emily Nestor. She's an educational technology specialist in Talladega County Schools in Alabama. I love Alabama, especially Huntsville. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Marika. We can get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stanley. I'm super excited to be leading this panel today. Hopefully you'll hear almost nothing from me because these panelists have amazing things to share. I do want to note that we've saved the last 10 minutes of our panel time today for your questions. So as they come up, please drop them in chat, and Stanley's going to be compiling some of those for us to have during the question and answer session. So we've got some seed questions for our panelists, but would love to have your questions as well. And with that, I want to start with our why. So, computational thinking is sort of new. It's becoming less new and more mainstream, but there are a lot of motivations for integrating computational thinking into disciplinary learning. So can you start by sharing why you integrate computational thinking and why you encourage other educators to do so? David, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, when I think about this question, there's like so many different reasons. I try to narrow it down into, I think, 3 that commonly come up in my work with teachers. The first one being that it's a skill set that you can use. Traditionally, we think that it's only with technology, but it has an unplugged side as well. And that unplugged side is something that feels very familiar to teachers who may not feel very familiar with CT when they first hear that concept. And through that, they can really work on problem solving and building a toolkit for their students to be able to approach problems, solve problems, and then talk about their thinking process. So that'll be my last point. It builds that metacognition for students where they're more aware of how they're approaching problems, the steps they're taking to solving those problems, and then explaining to one another. So it's not teacher-led, and there's a more student-led focus on explaining how I solved the problem, explaining the steps I took to do that, and then actually helping one another to approach similar problems in the future, whether it's in math or ELA or any of their other curricular areas.
Thank you so much. Emily, why do you integrate CT?
Well, for us, we are, our district is very heavy into like project-based learning, and that's kind of our framework for teaching and learning. So for us, computational thinking just provided our students with another set of problem-solving skills that they could utilize to really dive into those real world, meaningful outcomes from these PBL projects. We're also very STEAM heavy. We add the A in. And so just providing them with those different avenues and strategies related to those CT competencies just kind of helps them to dive a little deeper into their problem solving, and kind of helps the learning go from very, I guess, very static to more dynamic, because they are encouraged to like dive deeper and to look at different ways of solving problems.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Tim. Tim, you're still muted. So if you can unmute, that'd be great.
Sorry about that. Kind of piggybacking on what David and Emily shared, they're really life skills. Computational thinking is what we do every day in life. And I like to point that out to students and teachers to kind of demystify it, because you're always solving problems. You're always finding ways to solve problems. I'm going to put a little article coming from the elementary perspective. Let me see if I can put this in the chat. A really great article on executive function, and students 4 and 5, 6 years old, if they're exposed to computational thinking and computer science at an early age, they really accelerate their development in these areas. And it really inspired me even more. I have a passion for teaching computer science to young students, pre-K. We've done Code and Go Mice. We've done a lot of things. And if they continue to develop these skills in elementary, by the time they get to middle and high school, they're so much more proficient. And every other content area, you do computational thinking. You get, decomposition, you take problems, you break them down, you identify patterns, abstraction, all those things really tie all the subject content areas together. So that's why I think computational thinking is important.
Thank you. Our second question is, many teachers report not having very much confidence in their ability to integrate computational thinking in their classrooms. Can you describe 1 or 2 strategies that you use to support teachers who are new to computational thinking as they start integrating computational thinking in their classroom teaching? And first question, we'll start with Emily.
So we kind of started our CT initiative very on a very large scale. We went very district wide with that. And, we found that in order to really support that, we needed to provide those resources. So we actually developed a computational thinking pathway document that lays out what we identify as our big 3, which is our big 3 CT competencies that we focus on as a district. And we aligned those with our DLCS, our digital literacy and computer science standards that all K-12 teachers in the state of Alabama are responsible for teaching. And what we did is we said, oh, well, DLCS standard number 1 is algorithmic thinking. So this is a great place for you to embed that in. And then we added a bunch of resources and tools that they could utilize to further develop algorithmic thinking through the lens of that DLCS standard. So really just having that resource bank has been very big for us, and I think has been a factor in the success of us implementing CT in all disciplinaries K-12. Another just framework that we have in our district is the way that we approach coaching. We follow what used to be the Dynamic Learning Project framework, which is now the Google Certified Coach framework. So we follow that one-on-one coaching where a coach and a teacher are together for a 8-week period. And so during that time, they are able to really just focus on what the teacher feels is a challenge or an area they want to grow in. And they are there that entire time. So they are able to offer the support through modeling and co-teaching and co-planning, and just kind of be there to help support that teacher's journey. Those 2 things have really been just like transformational for us as we have, started and continued our journey of CT implementation.
Awesome. David, how about you?
Yeah, I think very similarly, we use a one-to-one coaching model. We give all of our teachers pre-assessment before they start their work with us, just to gauge where they are with their CT readiness and understanding, familiarity, how they use technology in their classroom already. And learning a little bit more about curriculum they use and other teaching strategies that they use in their classroom. Based off of that, the primary strategy that I use first with teachers who this may be a brand new concept or idea to, is to find those places where they're already using these concepts to help build their confidence and understanding of what CT is and how they're already using these concepts. Once we lay that groundwork, that tends to build a little bit of confidence with our teachers, especially unplugged. Often some of the confidence aspect of it that's verbalized with me from teachers is also tied into how they feel about their usage of technology. So we found that segmenting that a little bit and starting from a place without technology to start off can often build up that side, and then teachers feel more comfortable about how they may want to use technology or approach using technology. The other thing that we do is we align to, in New York, we have the Computer Science and Digital Fluency Learning Standards. And that does a really nice job also, as teachers are building familiarity with CT, of letting them know in one sentence, like what a second to third grader should be doing in their curriculum and their learning when it comes to using abstraction or decomposition or pattern recognition. And that's a very friendly, like one sentence statement that also helps teachers build existing connections to things they're doing in the classroom. The last strategy that I'll mention is also I try to make myself as available as possible to co-teach and model and work with their students. So whether it's using the CT vocabulary or introducing coding when we eventually get to that aspect of our work, I try to really make myself available as much as possible with all of our teachers and schools to make sure that they feel supported with this work as they're starting off.
Thank you so much. And Tim.
Once again, piggybacking on my two fellow panel members, getting teachers to see the connections between computer science and their curriculum. We start off with kindergarten teachers, and just the basic directions that are given. You create algorithms that when they dismiss going home from the classroom, how to get out of their chair, have them write the directions. You know, how do you move from your chair to the closet? What do you have to do when you're there? How do you go out the door? How do you exit the building? And it sounds really simplistic, but it really allows the teachers to see that computer science, like we said previously, is just life skills in a lot of ways, and computational thinking. How do you get to the cafeteria? You make the kids sit down and plot their way to the cafeteria. And then as they go to the cafeteria, they're internalizing what they have just done. We identified the standards, which was mentioned before. We go through the Maryland standards, because most teachers that I work with don't even realize that there are K-12 computer science standards. They're relatively new. And once they see them, they can start understanding that they're really not a big mystery, that it's just what they're doing. In math, you do multiplication in third, fourth grade, you start there, maybe second. You're doing loops. You're just doing the same thing over and over again. And language arts, you're just debugging. When you do your rough draft, you go back, you examine it, and you look through what you've done and you fix it. You know, just anything in life is just looking at it, running your program and fixing it. To me, that's life skill 101. We do that every day in whatever we do. And music, you're writing algorithms. And, you know, I've had so much fun with music teachers that just the smile on their face, they came in stressed out. I remember we did work with 7th and 8th grade music teachers that were suddenly told to teach computational thinking. And we said, you've been teaching computational thinking your whole career. You taught music, you taught verses, you showed students how to read music, you created music. Well, those were algorithms. Same thing, you did repeat loops, you know, you did the same sounds over and over again. And to see their faces and the joy they got it, it was like, oh yeah, well, we can do that. We've been doing that all our lives. We can teach this. So yeah, and just to demystify it, the unplugged activities David mentioned, like I said, you just have the kids do a lot of things, cooking, have them follow a recipe and bake something, and tell them what happens if I put dirt in instead of sugar. Well, it's not going to turn out. You have to follow things exactly. I think that's my biggest excitement about computer science and computational thinking. If you don't do it exactly, if you don't read and follow directions, it really shows the students that it's not going to work. It's one of the best experiences they have at understanding I've got to pay attention and I've got to follow directions for this to work. So
thank you guys so much. The next question we have is, large inequalities continue to exist in access to equipment and learning opportunities that are needed to build computational thinking skills for students that experience marginalization. And so what inclusive pedagogies do you promote to center equity when you integrate computational thinking into the classroom? And we'll start with Emily, but I invite the other two panelists to jump in after she's done.
So I may have my years wrong, but I think last year for us was our 4th year. Was it 4 or last year was year 3? It's all that we were
3rd, I think.
Yes. Okay. So last year we really decided to focus on the inclusivity part of computational thinking. And we spent a lot of time really diving into what inclusivity means and what it's going to look like, leaning towards, equity in CT. And what we really decided to focus on, pedagogically, that word will get you every time, was number one, making sure that we were providing access to CT for all. It wasn't something that was just being experienced in a computer class or STEAM class. It was something that they were doing in reading and math and science. Everyone had opportunities to engage with computational thinking. And to us, that kind of helped to ensure that everyone was getting to dip their toes in that water. But in order to also kind of make it more student-centered and to bring in that inclusivity piece, we really tried to highlight a lot of student voice and student culture through the activities that we, bring in computational thinking through. That's a big part of project-based learning too, student voice and choice, and then really having that tie into student culture. And then really just following these inclusive teaching practices that were shared with us by our friends at Digital Promise last year. And that was a great way for our teachers just to step back and look at the ways they were teaching in the classroom and realizing that, oh, well, did I know that I was being inclusive when I decided to do this way, when I gave students the opportunity to share what their personal experiences was, that's an element of CT. So for us, just kind of focusing on those 3 things was how we leaned towards making sure that equity was kind of centered and inclusivity was in the forefront of what we were doing with computational thinking.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, our teachers really wanted to make sure that students had choice in the kinds of projects they were doing, bringing in more of their culture, more of their experiences into their classroom assignments, and making sure that when students do have access to coding, that it's not just in the technology space or with the librarian, depending on the school, that it's actually embedded in part of their classroom, and that they all have access to devices. I think one of the big things that happened as a result of the pandemic, at least in New York City, was a lot of students received devices for remote learning, and a lot of students brought those devices back to school. And most of the schools we work with have students traveling with those devices, so that's addressed some of that the access issue that we saw a little bit at the start of this project. So now students have devices, but now really giving them those meaningful projects and opportunities for students to really share what they know, focusing on their experiences and their identity. So one example that I'll give is one of our schools currently for Black History Month coming up. Their students are going to do projects involving coding and movie making that they're going to share with their school communities about identity and what they love about themselves, and empowering one another to really love the differences in their community and love one another for, you know, their similarities and differences. But that empowerment piece is something that's really important to them. So we brought that into this work this year, supporting and using that technology tool to create a school culture where they're sharing information with one another across classrooms. So their ideas actually leave the classroom space and become part of the school community as a whole.
I fully agree. Those are great ideas. And one thing I would add is to show the diverse careers that are involved. Coming from the elementary perspective, I really like to expose the multitude of careers there are and put a face to them that matches the students I'm working with, so they can see someone that looks like them, talks like them. They can relate to it and see that that person succeeded in a field. One of my most exciting experiences, and I'll try to do this real quickly, was I'm blessed to have a friend who worked on the Hubble space mission. She was a project manager, one of the first women coders in the country that worked for NASA, which is real close to where we are. And she came in and talked to my 6th grade computer science club after school. And she blew me away the way she shared. But these students, you know, there was only like 10, very intimate setting. She sat down, shared everything she did with the Hubble space mission, talked about how she worked with others and collaborated, and just these basic concepts you want your kids to have. And then she sat down and worked on some code.org puzzles with us. And these kids, I know they didn't really grasp it, but I'm sitting there going, you kids don't even know how lucky you are. And then, but you know, you never know the impact, but one of the that has on students. But one of the students came up to me and said, Mr. Dixon, how do I work for NASA? And to me, that, you know, that was a touching moment because it kind of really pulled everything together and made you realize how important these experiences are. Those dinner room conversations. I work in Title I schools, always have. Many of my kids never had a dinner room conversation about what they were going to be or what college they were going to go to. College probably never came up in a dinner room conversation. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, but yeah, to speak to what you guys did, you have to show them the opportunities and show them what people that look like them can do.
Thank you, guys. I'm now going to open it up to some of the audience questions. We've had 2 questions so far, so we'll start with those, but I invite anyone else to drop questions in the chat for the remainder of our panel time. So the first question was asked by Emily, and she asked, how can I better incorporate computational thinking into my SPED social studies classes? So I'm going to open that up to our 3 panelists, whoever wants to volunteer to go first, thinking about incorporating for neurodiverse students and how to help computational thinking be something that's available to all students, no matter their learning needs.
Could I ask what grade that was again? I'm sorry, David, didn't mean to interrupt.
There is not a grade in the question, although Emily, feel free to come off mute and share if you have a specific grade or put it in the chat. I think just share whichever grade level you're familiar with. Emily shared that it's 11th and 12th grade that she's teaching.
So I'll share a thought. This came up in a conversation a few weeks ago with one of my 5th grade teachers. And they said, I'm familiar with the CT concepts, but how do I actually bring it into my social studies unit right now on European exploration? And the whole focus of it being the power dynamic of exploration and conquering nations. That's coming up as a theme throughout that. So what we did as we were talking is there's a lot of patterns, as with many things in history. You can use prior experience and knowledge to perhaps make predictions about the current unit, area of the world or topic that you're discussing. So I know with that teacher, they were going to focus on like decomposing the first European exploration, discovering the power dynamic, the reasons why they were exploring in the first place, those aspects. But then as they went through looking at other countries and their routes, really looking for patterns in that work and seeing if students can then make the predictions about why the Portuguese may have gone to explore the portion of the world that they did after they read about the Spanish, and then the same thing with the Dutch and the English. So I'd offer that as maybe one way that you can approach it in terms of discussion, is considering the patterns and that decomposition element that we see a lot in history, and helping students build some big connections with that.
I think another really a concrete way too would be to kind of look at like data collection and analysis. When we use data collection and analysis, like one of our caveats is that there always has to be a question that the students are trying to answer. And that has been kind of a power standard for several of our different, courses. So really, I mean, you could look at the content that you're wanting them to learn, think of a question that could be answered by collecting and kind of looking at data, and then have them collect it and then use that to form an opinion about something. And I feel like that is something that could really be tiered up or down, depending on differentiation, depending on who you are working with. And there are a ton of places where you can find those like live data. Well, Marika's a step ahead of me. Like in the chat, there's a ton of places where there's data already ready that they could pull and look at, that could be tied into maybe the content that you're teaching, and just giving them that question and having them, rationalize their answer based on the data that they're looking at.
To piggyback a little bit on what Emily said, David, I put in a basic Scratch example for antonyms for elementary, where the characters talk back and forth to each other, and that may be too simplistic, but it's a great way for the characters to interview each other and dig out and answer the questions in kind of an entertaining way. And to help support, they may have some challenges with reading and spelling, even at the high school level. I don't know. I know elementary does. Maybe by high school, they all know how to spell everything, and sentence structure and all those things come natural. But it's just a way that they can have the characters talk to each other. It can you could put in obviously your translations if they're English language learners, to help them overcome those challenges. They could write it in Spanish or whatever language and have it translated to English to help the teacher understand what they're saying. So hopefully that's not too simplistic, but I think Scratch would even work at the high school level and get them engaged. It'd be exciting for them to do a project in Scratch. So hopefully that would help.
Thank you guys so much. The second question that's been asked in chat came from Elizabeth, who asked, how can I better, that's just a second. I copied it and copied it wrong because I have the same question twice. Let's try this again. How did your district become a CT district? So I'll open that to anyone. That's probably Emily, you can probably speak the most to that, but Tim, I'm sure you have some insights as well. And David, you might have some thoughts around the districts you've worked with.
So our very first opportunity with computational thinking came from a grant that we received to partner with the National Science Foundation and Digital Promise to do a Pathways collaborative. So that is where we really began CT. That was with a very small group. And then over the this would be year 4. So then over those 4 years, we have just expanded it. So, we kind of started with a very small district, established the shared leadership, established the why, began looking into like CT and where we see it. And then we were able to kind of start to trickle it out in small phases to where it eventually reached everyone. And now it is just part of our framework. Like I mentioned earlier, we're computational thinking, we're a project-based learning district, and we actually revamped the way that we plan PBL projects to always include a CT competency, so that it just makes it even more interconnected with what we're already doing. So it really began with establishing the why with a small group, and then letting that small group build. Marika shared the toolkit. That is a great place to start if you're looking and wanting to start the CT journey. So many great strategies and resources there. I think it's just all about knowing what your district's vision is for CT, what you want CT to look like in your district, and then taking the small steps to get there.
We were mandated to do it. So we were kind of forced by the state. And I shared a little bit earlier how the teachers were just thrown in at the last minute. So we had to quickly come up with some ideas. And I worked mostly at the elementary, a little bit at the middle, but we used code.org's computational thinking programs and to get it in. And then we had our state standards that were quickly put together. So it's been a challenging learning process getting these things put together.
Yeah, and a little bit from our side for our project, we were funded and partner with Robinhood, funded by Robinhood, and we partner with BrainPop as our tech resource providers. So they offered all of our schools license for their product and their features. We started with 10 schools and gradually over time expanded to 3 grade levels at our schools. So we started with 4th grade, included 5th grade, and this year we brought 3rd grade into the fold. So we're using a gradual kind of rollout process going forward. So a little bit about that. And I know that we interviewed some of the administrators at the schools and really did it by interest. And we collaborated a little bit with the CS for All managers in New York to hear a little bit about which principals, administrators, and schools they thought would be most interested, so we could identify those first 10 schools. Yeah, and that's kind of how we started and where we are today with that rollout.
And I think that thinking back to the question number 2 about like the strategies to support, I really wholeheartedly believe that really good job embedded professional development is key to successful implementation of computational thinking, because if teachers don't wholeheartedly understand what it is, what it looks like, what it means, then that reluctancy is going to be even higher. That was another part of our foundation of rolling this out, was actually creating professional development, providing it to all 600 of our classroom teachers, and then offering those follow-up supports. We also had them participate in activities that allowed them to experience it. We have like an administrator meeting where we pull teacher leaders and our admins together monthly, and for a whole week we had those groups keep track of like what they were doing every day. And then when we all came together, we showed them how to use conditional formatting on a Google Sheet and auto create a chart that allowed them to see how they were spending most of their time. So that was kind of our question, like, are you making the impact you're wanting to make based on how you're spending your time? And it was mind-blowing to them that being able to collect that and then conditionally format it is a 3rd grade skill according to our DLCS standards. So that not only allowed them to participate in kind of a CT activity, but it also kind of helped us settle into like our why. and establish that importance. So I think that's a big part of it too, making sure that the support is there to let them learn more and engage in CT themselves before they're asked to do it in their own classrooms.
Yeah, we're working with the state on doing a lot of summer training to really get the teachers exposed, like Emily was saying, to what CT is. And we've written lesson plans for them so they can easily integrate it right into their curriculum. Because it is a big change. It's a big difference, as we've talked about earlier. But once they see how easily it can go into the curriculum, it alleviates a lot of the stress typically. Because let's face it, we all know teachers have so much on their plates anyways. It's really hard to have another thing thrown at you and told you to to be told to teach computational thinking also. So.
Well, thank you so much to our panel. Not only did you have incredibly insightful answers, you've also managed to end just about right on time, which I don't know any panel in the history of ever has not had to get cut off. So thank you guys so much for these great answers. I'm going to turn it back over to Stanley, who's going to introduce our next activity. I'm excited to start some conversations around what Emily, David, and Tim have shared today.
Thanks, Marika. And shout out to my co-hosts, Marika and Allison, for being great on this. Shout out to our panelists. Y'all had some great discussions, some great ideas, and we're going to just keep that going. So this is the part where we're going to get into our breakout groups. I'm going to open up about 3 rooms, and I'm going to ask that our panelists join a room first, and we're going to just keep the discussion going. So you don't have to use these guiding questions. These are just here in case you need something to kind of prompt you into talking. So you can say, you can get into your groups and you can think of how are you thinking of integrating computational thinking into your coaching strategy, or how can you help support educator capacity building from computational thinking in the classroom, or what comes to mind when you think of technology that can help support computational thinking. So again, these are just to guide you throughout the conversation. And also just keep in mind those agreements that we discussed earlier as we come together and have these discussions. Hey, everyone, welcome back. We hope you had some great discussions. When I dropped in a couple of rooms, it looked like it was some dynamic stuff going on. So thankfully, we still have some folks that we can continue to wrap this up with. So for this next segment, we're just going to spend a couple of minutes to share out any aha moments or anything interesting that you might have talked about in your breakout group. So if you feel more comfortable, you can use the chat, but feel free to unmute and share out. Yeah, everyone, if you're just getting back, we're going to share out some aha moments or interesting learnings from our discussions. So feel free to use the chat, or you can add it into, you can unmute and just share out loud.
I think one aha moment for me was that my teachers that I'm worried about coaching using the I cannot speak this afternoon, sorry, computational thinking, are already using tools for that, like such as Nearpod, Flipgrid, Pear Deck, Jamboard. They're already using those tools. So just diving in with them a little bit more so that they can understand how those tools that they are using is also working with the computational thinking for their students.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Tim and I had a great conversation. We were the only 2 in the room, so we had a good time. At least I did. I think Tim did too. But I teach high school and Tim does the lower level elementary. And we were talking about the things that we have in common that we both can do to promote computational thinking with our students. And so it's really such a great tool that is across the not only the disciplines, but it's also vertical, that you can teach it to your preschool kids as well as your high school kids, as well as I teach college as well. So my college students as well. So anyways, it goes across both ways.
That's awesome. And y'all were one of those groups I saw. It looked like y'all were having a good time. So I'm glad y'all can talk about that and get a good discussion going.
Thanks to Emily, I had two ahas. One was, and I had to look it up because I didn't know it, even though I went to the camp on Saturday, the key elements and concepts of CT. And Emily's suggestion was to just focus on one to start with. So either like I wanted either decomposition or working with data, and then we brainstormed some specific applications of that. So I'm very appreciative of having to, I'm going to start embarking on this whole new journey.
That makes everybody happy to hear. I'm glad to hear that. And thank you for sharing. Can we maybe get one more share out before we wrap up? All right, if not, no pressure. You can always email me, or you can always contact us and we'll get right back to you if you have any other discoveries that you have, or if you have any questions about anything. So Marika, do you want to maybe just talk about the CT report for a bit, and then I can wrap up with the survey?
Definitely. So one resource we wanted to make sure to share with you guys is this new CT report that Digital Promise just published. I just threw a link to it in the chat. This report is called Computational Thinking for an Inclusive World. It is specifically designed for educators. So it's not written for researchers. It's not written, for someone who's not in the classroom. It's really focused on you all and how you guys can start thinking about computational thinking and what it means for you and your students. The report itself is a little bit big and a little bit long. So to get you started, we created a quick start and discussion guide. That's about 10 or 11 pages that kind of gives an overview and some of the most helpful tables and resources from the report. And if you find that useful, I do encourage you to look through the whole report, especially looking at the case studies and seeing if any of those case studies are helpful to you. Emily's work in Talladega, as well as David's work with Project Tomorrow, are both featured in those case studies. So it's a good way to kind of check them out, learn about some different computational things that are happening and going on. And that will also help define computational thinking a little bit more for you guys, and what those skills and practices are that Emily was talking about, and Helene as well. So hopefully that's useful to you. If you guys have any questions, please let us know.
Thank you, Marika. All right, and just to wrap up, we have a mid-year survey that you might have noticed that went out about a week or so ago, a few days ago. And we need your feedback. So we're going to continue to have these cool workshops, and we're going to continue to send you all regular updates. But we just want to know, what are you all looking for, and what is going to be the best thing to deliver. So we have a mid-year survey that you've got in your email, and I'm going to drop the link in here as well. And we're just asking that you complete this by January 27th, and give us as much feedback as possible. You can also enter your name for a chance to win a maker kit from Digital Promise. And we'll send out details later on about what that's going to include. But it's something cool. So feel free to take advantage of this opportunity and help us to create a better workshop experience for you, and a better Google group experience for you as well. So what we have to look forward to are a few upcoming workshops. The next one we're going to have is on February 22nd. After that, we have one on March 29th, and then on April 26th. So we'll be releasing the details on those workshops soon, so you can know exactly what the theme is and what we're going to be getting into. But this can be helpful just so you can block out that time. We always have a workshop on the last Tuesday of each month. So feel free to block these off, and we'll reach out to you soon with the details of everything once they become available. So I want to say thank you again to my co-hosts, Allison Modica, Marika Conrad, Dr. Marika Conrad. And shout out to our hosts, David, Emily, and Tim. Y'all were amazing. Shout out to our audience, our coaches. I know this is, your time is very valuable, and we appreciate you all taking the time to convene with us and have these meaningful discussions. So again, look out for these next calendar invites. And thank you again for coming. We'll see you soon. Have a good one.